chemistry on Ted's lab at Stony Brook University, like all of the fine folks that have already presented this morning. And I'm going to present on some work that a bunch of us are a part of, and this is sort of just a smaller piece of a larger project. So my talk is evaluating changes in spatial and temporal dynamics of cold and warm adapted fish, focusing today's talk on winter and summer flounder in a changing Long Island Sound. So I haven't seen that many Long Island Sound themed talks up here in Lake George. No worries, I don't mind carrying the torch. So to orient you all, the Long Island Sound is a marine sound and tidal estuary of the Atlantic Ocean. It's situated between Long Island, New York on the south and the state of Connecticut to the north. It's approximately 110 miles long, 21 miles wide at its widest point. And it has a range of depths from 20 to 70 meters, but overall it's relatively shallow. It's a mix of marine and freshwater inputs that creates a dynamic salinity gradient, and it is a home to a range of diverse habitats within it. Unfortunately, the Long Island Sound is changing. Over the last 25 years, as I mentioned, it's relatively shallow, all things considered, so it's been warming. The graphic on the left just shows median fall bottom temperature throughout the years, so you can just see it's warming. And the image on the bottom is a graph from the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, their bottom trawl survey. Just the fact that the mean number of species per sample in both their fall and spring surveys, they're catching more of those warm adapted species versus cold adapted species, with a notable shift around the year 2000, where in the spring, those warm adapted species take over the majority of the trawl, and also in the fall, that's when they really start to diverge and run away there. So as I mentioned, this is just a small part of a larger project that we're looking at a series of warm and cold adapted species to look at their changes throughout the sound. So that utilizes scup, butterfish, summer flounder, black sea bass, striped sea robin, northern sea robin, and blue crab as our warm representatives. And conversely, window pane flounder, little skate, four-spot flounder, winter flounder, spotted hake, silver hake, red hake, and American lobster as our cold adapted species. The overarching objective that we're aiming for is to evaluate distributional changes of both the warm and cold adapted species in the Long Island Sound in order to inform their monitoring and management. Specifically under this, there are sort of 5 smaller tasks and objectives that we would like to accomplish. The first being to understand changes in abundance and distribution over time. The second, to identify key environmental variables that influence habitat use and their distribution. The third is to develop models that find, now, and forecast suitable habitat and distribution. Fourth, to evaluate impacts of the changes on the monitoring and management of the Long Island Sound fish community. And lastly, to engage stakeholders for outreach, for feedback, to better sort of incorporate that into management. Today's talk is focusing specifically on some of the work for this first objective, so understanding changes in abundance and distribution over time, and focusing on winter and summer flounder being one of our warm adapted species, and winter flounder being a representative of our cold adapted species. So to accomplish this first task, we developed a series of spatial indicators using survey catch data from the CTD trawl survey. It's a bottom trawl that runs every fall and spring. And so we developed each of these indicators for both species for each season, so fall and spring. So the indicators that were developed were center of gravity, which just refers to the mean location of the population, positive area, which is the measure of space occupied by fish densities greater than 0, inertia, which is the variance in the location of individuals in the population. So this is just describing the spread of the population around that center of gravity. And then evenness, utilizing Cro-Magnon's evenness index to look at changes in the evenness of distribution. So high values indicate that non-zero catch is relatively consistent, but if you get lower values, it indicates that some locations may have higher catch than others. These indicators, along with an abundance index, are calculated and weighed based on areas of influence. So this is an analysis of the survey, of the closest of survey locations, and you do this for each season and each year. The reason that we did this and why it's important is because there is significantly less sampling in the western Long Island Sound. But in order to be comparable across years and seasons, we conducted the spatial indicator analysis across the entire area of the Sound and then weighed according to each year and season. So the graphic on the bottom is just an example of just like, I just grabbed this, it's just a year, a random year and season, and then you use the location of all the stations and polygons to create them, and that's how it's made. Jumping right into results, I'll start with summer flounder, which, as you might remember, is our warm adapted species. So summer flounder in the spring We'll start at the top left and go across. So looking at changes in center of gravity for longitude and latitude, it's a southwestern trend over the time series. This is not a great way to represent changes in center of gravity, so I do have a plot later on that's sort of a better visual representation. But as I mentioned, it's a southwestern trend in the spring. Positive trends in inertia, abundance index, positive area, and sort of a decreasing trend in evenness with an increase in the later part of the time series. So this means basically that for evenness, there was a period of time where there was higher catch in certain survey locations than others, and now it's starting to even out, so like the catch is becoming more uniform across all the survey stations. Moving on to the fall, you can see, once again, starting top left, there's relatively little change in center of gravity over the time series. It remains pretty stable, just like small variations and shifts. Increasing trends in inertia, abundance index, positive area, and once again, very little trend in evenness. So that U-shaped trend in inertia, that means that that spread around the center of gravity, it was spreading out, and there was a period of contraction, and then spread out again. Here's this map that I was talking about, a better way to just represent changes in center of gravity. So darker colors represent more recent years in the time series, while lighter colors represent the earlier years in the time series. So you can see in the spring there's sort of a slight southwestern trend, while in the fall everything is pretty tightly clustered and there's no real trend, just slight fluctuations year to year. Moving on to our cold adapted species, winter flounder. Winter flounder tell a very different story. So starting again at the top left, there's a very, very slight change in center of gravity, southwestern trend, particularly the more recent part of the time series. Positive trend in inertia, but just negative trends in abundance index, positive area, and evenness. So this indicates that even though the population is declining in the positive area, so that just amount of space that they're found is contracting or like fragmenting, and evenness is going down, so that means that some locations have really high catch and other locations don't have any catch. Inertia, it has been increasing, which implies that even though there's potential fragmentation of the population, the actual spread inside those areas is increasing. Moving on to the fall, there is a strong southwest shift in center of gravity over the time series. It's just been moving in that direction, basically. A decreasing trend in inertia, abundance index, again, really dramatically in positive area, but this time it shows an increasing trend in evenness for the fall, which just means that within sort of those fragmented areas or those contracted areas that winter flounder are pulling themselves into, it's got a pretty uniform distribution for those little pockets. Once again, we have the center of gravity maps. In the spring, there was sort of very little trend, but in the fall, we just saw there was a pretty dramatic shift, a southwestern shift, just continually over the time series. So some takeaways from this part of the project are that the Long Island Sound is continuing to shift further into a fish community dominated by those warm adapted species, with our cold adapted species, winter flounder populations in decline, unfortunately. And it suggests that the distribution of winter flounder is contracting or becoming more patchy over time. This could reflect potential habitat loss, population decline, other factors that aren't considered in sort of spatial analysis, like predator-prey dynamics. And the opposite story is true for summer flounder, which is that the distribution in abundance is expanding just across time, both seasons. So the next part of this, we wanted to look at where are those changes actually happening in time. Where in our data set do we see any trends or patterns and changes? And so we decided to conduct change point analysis using two what we feel are complementary analyses, Bayesian change point or BCP analysis and PELT, which is print exact linear time analysis. So Bayesian change point analysis detects sort of gradual or continuous changes over time. It provides a certain level of certainty for each point. So it does this by looking at every point in the data set, sort of calculating how likely it is that a change is going to occur at that exact data point based on the trend of the previous ones. It's useful for capturing subtle shifts or patterns that might just develop gradually over time. PELT analysis is very different. It's the exact opposite. It's designed to detect sudden and clear shifts in the data So it's good for looking at abrupt changes. It is providing clear and distinct breakpoints, and it does this by splitting the data set into sections where the data behaves similarly to each other, and then it will find the start and end point of those periods. So starting again with summer flounder in spring, these are the exact same spatial indicator plots basically that I showed before, except now the change points are on top of it. The writing is very small, but the pelt change points, which are the abrupt change points, are blue, and the BCP, the gradual ones, are in red. And instead of just standing here and naming every single year that change points occurred, I'm going to talk about general trends that we've seen across species and seasons. So the first being that for summer flounder in particular, there were way more pelt, so those abrupt change points, there were way more pelt, those abrupt change points, than the gradual change points, which indicates that changes for summer flounder, this was seen across both seasons, but changes for winter flounder are not so much gradual as there are these sort of distinct stepwise sort of marks where transitions happen. And I will point out that the similar pattern that's seen is that these transition points are triggered depending on the indicator somewhere in the early 90s, somewhere in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, and then again sort of early 2010s to mid 2010s. The BCP, or those gradual change points, when they do occur, they tend to mirror the same patterns that we see in the pelt change points, which just means that even though our data has a lot of fluctuations in points, they're actually capturing meaningful trends rather than just like picking up on a lot of noise or potential fluctuations. Again, you can see this trend for summer flounder in the fall. Particularly at the bottom there, you see that basically these pelt change points are capturing some effects that happened in the early 90s, early 2000s, and again in the early 2010s, with slight variation in years depending on when it affected the change points. Winter flounder, which is, as we mentioned, has the opposite story of summer flounder, shows the exact same pattern, which is that there are these distinct periods sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, early to mid 2000s, and again early to mid 2010s, now with some change points sort of starting to crop up again in these most recent years. Just indicating that winter flounder also show the same patterns, that it's not really gradual, slow, continuous change, but there are sort of these marked points where once it crosses a particular threshold, and probably other factors going on with the all-around sound fish community outside of flounders themselves, but there are sort of marked points where after that it's like a point of no return to the previous. Same patterns again for winter flounder in the fall. Yeah, same exact patterns. Takeaways from this, overall trends, expansion versus contraction. Okay, I have a mistake in my writing, but listen to my words. Summer flounder change points align not with steady growth, but with abrupt change. Same thing for winter flounder, and these change points highlight, there are highlights of both gradual and abrupt change. As I mentioned, those periods that crop up again, early 2000s, early 2010s. So both species are responding to environmental changes or environmental effects that are taking place, and they have the trends of the exact similar years where change points occurred, but with very, very different outcomes for each species. The sort of larger takeaways is that the all-around sound is continuing to transition to a fish community dominated by the warm-adapted fishes, and unfortunately the cold-adapted winter flounder are not doing so well. They're struggling to maintain their distribution and population, and both species exhibit change points, however those responses differ. So when thinking about this, the divergent trajectories of these two species underscore broader ecological shifts that are occurring in the Long Island Sound, and this sort of dual dynamic emphasizes the importance of long-term monitoring, species-specific management, and climate-adaptive conservation strategies in order to try and sustain population and ecosystem health, particularly for those populations of cold-adapted species. So with that, I would like to thank our funders at the Long Island Sound Study, the New York Sea Grant, the team at Stony Brook who helps work on these projects, and this sort of larger project that this is a small part of, and then our other PIs and contributors at the New York Sea. And with that, I will